In this video, I'll show you how we can combine multiple images together to create this surreal-looking nighttime cityscape in Photoshop. Hi again, Michael Voloshinovich here with another Photoshop tutorial. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/vibrantshot and also at vibrantshot.com. So in today's tutorial, we're going to be doing a fun tutorial this time as opposed to some of the more technique-based tutorials that we covered previously. Here we're actually going to be building up this image and looking at some different tools and techniques that you can use to make a nighttime image look a lot more interesting and overcome some of the problems that we face when shooting nighttime images. So just as we can see here, the colors are kind of bland. We have a lot of kind of green color cast down here in the water, and then this sky is kind of washed out. This moon is, I think, a little too imposing in the sky. So we're going to work through a number of different adjustments in terms of colors and extending dynamic range, but also doing some more composite type work to ultimately get to this final image that we have over here. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off, and we're basically going to look at fixing the dynamic range issues that we have within this image. So essentially my base image is actually this one here, but what I did was I took the black slider in Lightroom down to about -30, -20 or so. What I basically did, I took it down to the point where these more washed out tones became black. So I wanted to kind of get to a nice clean black base. Now the next thing we want to do is actually recover some of the dynamic range that we lost within this base exposure, and also when we took our black point down, we want to bring some of that back out. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in some more of this layer, which is essentially the base exposure plus one stop. So I didn't really make any adjustments to this one in Lightroom. It's more or less as it is out of camera, with the obvious exception of just fixing some lens distortions and chromatic aberration and things like that. So the first thing that we're going to do is basically, rather than using luminance masks, which I typically use for blending multiple exposures, here we're just going to use a simple painted mask. And the reason we don't want to use luminance masks is because we don't want it to start blending in this bottom portion here. So really the only detail we want to bring out is maybe some detail in this bridge here, some information along the shore here, as well as some of the details back here that have been lost, and maybe some detail in the buildings. But this sort of dark area down here, we kind of want to keep it as is, because there's really nothing interesting there that we want to bring back. In fact, we kind of want to almost obscure this, and eventually this will also house the reflection for our stars. So again, I don't really want to use luminance masks because ultimately then I'll have to start masking things in manually afterwards anyway, so it's just easier to use painted masks for this. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go into our channels. Now here in this case, I have saved us a whole ton of time by already making a cutout of this guy. Now if we were to do that here in this video, we would be here for close to 3 hours, because that is actually how long it took to make this cutout. And the reason is that there were no really simple tools. I tried to use channels-based selections to blend this out. I tried to use the quick mask. I tried to use sorry, not the quick mask, the quick selection, as well as the magic wand tool. Nothing actually made a clean selection of this, just because the color and brightness variation between the rooftops and the sky is simply not enough. And then on top of it, we have some of these starbursts over here. So unfortunately, I had to actually manually cut this out using the pen tool, which took, like I said, close to about 2 or 3 hours. So to save you watching me do that for 3 hours, I have saved that selection and we have it here within our sky cutout channel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the command or control key, click on our cutout, and that's just going to give us our sky there. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to throw this, I can either put this into a group or I can just hit Command Shift I, and this way we're always operating within the constraints of this bottom portion here. So we can kind of go either way. Actually, I'm going to deselect this first and just add a layer mask here. And I'm going to add a black layer mask. So I'm going to hold down Option or Alt and just add our layer mask there to essentially mask that whole layer out. Now we're going to go back and repeat that. So holding down Command or Control, click on our sky cutout, hit Command or Control, Shift I, so Command Shift I to invert that selection, and then I'm going to hit Command H or Control H to hide that, because I don't really want to see those marching ants. So now we're going to just zoom in here and we're actually going to start painting in some of these details. So we're going to go ahead and grab a nice soft brush. Make sure that hardness is set 0. Flow rate should be in and around 7 or 8%. And just pick the appropriate size. And let's go ahead and start brushing that in. So basically wherever you want to reveal information, that's where you're going to start brushing it in. So this is going to take a little bit of time, so just kind of bear with me, and hopefully you're not going to get too bored watching this. But really what I'm doing is I'm just kind of bringing in the areas that I think should be accented a lot more, and ultimately what I think makes the image interesting. So again, doing this with a painted mask, we can be quite selective as to what we actually reveal and what we don't reveal. And when I did this in the final image, it probably took me maybe 15-20 minutes because I was going through fairly carefully and just selecting the areas that I really wanted to. And then right now I'm painting in white to reveal, but also afterwards I went in with a black brush and just kind of tidied up areas that I didn't want selected. So we're not going to spend too much time on it here because I think you kind of get the idea of what we're doing. But what I'm really trying to do is emphasize some of these lines formed by the bridge, and that really lead the eye across and reveal a lot of this detail in the bridge that was lost in that particular layer. Now in this case I am using a Wacom tablet for this. It does make the job a lot easier because it just allows you to make more natural strokes. So as you can see, I'm really just kind of accenting these curves because I do want those reflections to really pop out. And just really extending the dynamic range within that bridge, as well as revealing some of that information on the other side there. So just kind of, alternating between a smaller and a bigger brush. So that looks like it's pretty good as far as the bridge goes. Don't really have to do too much more than that. Really, again, what I'm trying to do is reveal the details within the blacks without making them too dark. So basically I just want to make sure that I'm not clipping any blacks here within the relevant areas. Alright, so I don't want to keep you here for too long watching me do this not so exciting stuff, but that's basically what we want. Now, I do want to bring in a little bit more detail in these buildings up here, so just bear with me while I brush some of that in. Now, the great thing is that we can be fairly liberal with our painting here, knowing full well that our selection that we made around our sky is going to make sure that we don't encroach into the sky area and create these weird halos in the sky. So I can just very kind of quickly brush through here and reveal some of that detail. Again, just trying to make sure that I'm not really clipping any blacks here. So we have detail everywhere, and then afterwards we're going to refine all of that with dodging and burning anyways. But obviously it's better to use the exposure if we have it rather than try and dodge it back in, because then will ultimately lead to noise, and that is not something that we want. Alright, I think we're pretty close there. Okay, so I think you get the idea there. Now if we just kind of toggle this on and off, let's see where we're at. So basically we have taken it from not really having much visual interest, and essentially our eye always goes into this building here because it's the brightest, to now having something that pulls the eye across and having a much more balanced exposure across the relevant parts of our image. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and work on this bottom portion here. I think that these like sharp edges over here within the reflections, they're not terribly attractive, so I do want to take care of that. And also, I don't actually like the position of this moon, so one thing we're going to do is actually take it out of the sky, and if we're going to take that out, then obviously we have to take the reflection out as well. So let's go ahead and just kind of dispense with that, and I think I'm pretty happy with the actual blend here, so I'm actually going to hit Command-Option-Shift-E to create a stamp visible layer, and then let's try and actually get rid of this here. So let's first start off by trying to, see, I still have my selection, so let me just hit Command-D. Why did it create a group? There we go. Command D or Control D will make sure I deselected everything. And then let's just make a quick selection around this. And let's see how we do with content aware fill on this. If it works okay for us, then we just saved a bit of time. If not, then we'll probably use the clone stamp tool. And that's, I think, a pretty good starting point. So let's just leave that, and I'm going to create another layer on top of that. And let's just finish everything off with the clone stamp tool here. So I'm going to keep a reasonable flow rate here. I'm going to set the blend mode of this to darken because we're obviously darkening everything. And let's just kind of sample around and replace all of this stuff here. We can take our flow rate up just slightly to save a bit of time. So obviously not doing anything too profound here, just trying to get rid of stuff that we don't need. Tidying up this water. And we don't want to completely eliminate this light glow from this one here, so we do want to kind of gently feather that in. I think that's pretty good. We are actually going to be blurring this, so I think that's going to serve us just fine. And now I'm going to get rid of this little piece of land here, which is just a distraction. And there we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually just merge that down. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a duplicate of this layer. So just hit Command J or Control J. And we could use Gaussian blur to actually blur this water's edge out, but I didn't really like the way it looked. It didn't really look very natural. And so what I'm actually going to use the motion blur tool. So we're going to go to Filter, Blur, and Motion Blur. And then I think let's just find a good distance to blur. I think that's good enough. I mean, basically I just wanted to get rid of those rough edges that are there. So we're going to click OK, hold down Option or Alt, and we're going to add our layer mask to essentially mask everything out. And then once again, select a white brush, soft brush, so 0 hardness. Pick the appropriate size. Flow rate can be, in and around 15% or so, maybe even a little bit higher. And we're just going to start brushing in this bottom portion here. So obviously the most important areas to brush in are these little lights down here. And then I'm going to actually just increase my brush size here and just kind of brush in this area. Just in case there's any smaller bits down here, I want to make sure I just cover those up. And we can actually increase our flow rate a tiny bit. So basically what I want to do is just avoid kind of getting close to this water's edge here, just because it will start to blur out that area and we don't really want that. So basically the reason I didn't bring out all the dynamic range in here is to give me a transition point between this blur and our actual detail. So we can just go over that and then select black as our foreground color. I'm just going to go over the edge again, just to make sure that we've brushed everything out of there. And we can just kind of verify that we're not covering everything just by holding down the Option key, so we can just see where our layer mask is, and that should actually be okay. Alright, so just finishing this off here, let's just bring in a little bit more blur into there. And I think we're good. Actually, let's also blur this area over here. And this just kind of gives us a nice painterly feel with these blurred out reflections. It's not really detail that we ever needed in the first place. And I think it looks a lot more pleasing if we kind of go between this and this. It helps to build up that ethereal feel that we're going for. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of the actual foreground piece of our image. So now we can actually turn our attention over to the sky, where we're actually going to be spending the bulk of the time of this particular part of the tutorial. And we're going to do that by bringing in this star layer that we have over here, and essentially these stars were just shot separately outside the city. It would be very difficult to shoot them at the same time as shooting the rest of the image, simply because there's so much light pollution from the city itself that it would be very difficult to expose for the stars and not get a really washed out sky. Now if you were doing a landscape somewhere in, let's say, the middle of Utah, you could just throw your camera on a tripod and expose for the land, expose for the sky, and just shoot them both in one session. But in this case, it's not really possible. So what we're going to do with the sky is, first of all, let's just adjust it a little bit. So I'm going to hit Command T, hold down the Shift key, and we're just going to slide it up a little bit. And then I'm actually going to create a duplicate of this sky layer just by hitting Command J. And again, I'm going to hit Command T, and I'm just going to actually rotate it around 180 degrees. So I basically, whatever was at the bottom, I'm going to bring it up to the top, and just to kind of create more stars in our sky. Again, we can just kind of adjust that until we're happy. Maybe somewhere around there. And now we're going to take those two star layers and just group them together. So select them, hit Command G or Control G, and we're going to name that stars. Next thing we're going to do is create another group. So again, hitting Command G, and we're going to call this one Sky. And we're going to go in here and again hit Command or Control on our sky cutout channel. And we're going to add a layer mask. So that basically is going to mask everything out with the exception of the actual sky. So now we have the rest of our land back, and we've just got our stars in the sky. So what we now want to do is make a series of adjustments to this just to make the sky look a little bit better. So let's go ahead and grab our curves adjustment layer. And I'm actually going to just bring this up here, and I'm going to clip it down to this star layer here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit more exposure here, basically just bringing up the midpoint. And I'm going to hit Command I to just mask that out. Next, we're going to grab a linear gradient, so just selecting white to transparent, so foreground color to transparent basically, which is the second one in here. And we're just going to swipe up from, well, that's the horizon line, something like that, maybe just a little bit more here. There we are. Now actually what I want to do is I want to get rid of this this moon here before we proceed any further, because I find it is quite distracting, and it's going to make it a little bit harder for us to actually work with these stars. So let's go ahead and create another new layer here. I'm actually going to drag this below our star layer. And all we're going to do is we're going to grab a brush and just sample out this blue color over here. So some sort of kind of middle of the road color, not too dark, not too light. Again, we're going to grab a gradient tool, so foreground to transparent, and we're going to paint basically, let's say from here to here. Let's see how that looks. I think that's not too bad actually. So very quickly we just get rid of that that actual moon there and start with sort of a clean base. Now one thing I am finding is that this background layer is a little bit maybe on the magenta side. So one thing we can do is hit Command U on that layer and just kind of shift this until it's a little bit more blue, and I think that's a fairly pleasing tone. Okay, so now that we have that, let's actually get rid of some of this hazing that we have on the side of our sky here. So we're going to do that with, again, another curves adjustment. This time we're actually going to go down in our exposure. And we're just going to grab, again, our foreground to transparent gradient, and let's just hit Command I on that again. So with the layer mask selected, just hit Command I or Control I, and let's just swipe across here, and also going across here. And that's just going to get rid of some of that hazing for us. I think I'm going to add one more curves adjustment layer. Just kind of adding a little minor S-curve there just to bring up some contrast. And now I'm going to add a little bit of color into this sky. So let's go ahead and grab our selective color adjustment. And with our black color selected, we're going to add a little bit more blue tone into that sky just by pulling down the yellow. So essentially yellow and blue are opposites. So we're going to introduce a little bit more blues into our blacks. So let's just drag that down, and as you can see, kind of as we go with this, it's going to make it more blue. Now we don't want to overdo it, so you only need a little bit. I find whenever you're working with blacks, just the slightest adjustment will make a difference. So we're going to leave it at around -2. Next thing we're going to do, I might actually even take that opacity down a tiny bit more. There we are. And then we're going to grab another layer here. Again, just kind of clipping that down to our star layer. And once again, working with a linear gradient, this time we're going to select a brighter blue color, so something like this here. And now we're going to swipe up again from our horizon. We're just going to go up, and we're going to go into our blending options and blend it with a color blend mode. Now we're going to turn our opacity down to around 30% just to create this sort of subtle glow on the horizon line. Next, we're going to create one more layer. Again, clipping that down. This time we're going to pick more of a magenta kind of color, so something like this. And again, I'm just going to create a few gradients here. And then we're going to blur this quite a bit. So we're going to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, pick a really large blur radius, so in this case let's say around 200 pixels, and I'm actually going to move this down, so I'm just going to use my move tool and just take this down a tiny bit. There we are. And again, blending with color blend mode. We're going to drop our opacity quite significantly here, again down to about 20 to 30%. And that's just going to introduce, again, a faint amount of color within our horizon. So now, last thing I'm going to do is add a little bit more sort of glow into our center of our horizon here. So we're going to add one more layer. Again, clipping down by holding Option and clicking in between the layers. We're going to this time pick our gradient tool, but this time we're going to use the circular gradient. And we're just going to swipe from here to here. Actually, whoops, forgot to change my colors. Let's just make sure we have white selected as our foreground color, and let's try that again. So something like that's pretty good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hit Command T. I want to scale this up a little bit, so holding down the Option key, we're just going to stretch this out and maybe just nudge it up a little bit using our up arrows. And I'm actually going to blur this again, so I'm just going to apply the same level of blur that I applied to our purple haze there. And this time we're going to blend it with luminosity blend mode. And we're going to bring our opacity down again until it looks pretty good. So I think around 20 or so percent will look pretty nice. Okay, so that basically takes care of making our sky look a little bit better. So now we can finish things off by introducing our shooting star and our moon. So for our shooting star, we're going to create another blank layer, and we're going to select our pen tool. Now in the case of the pen tool, I'm not going to cover it in too much detail right now. We're actually going to cover it in part 2 of this video, so I think I forgot to mention that this is going to be a two-part video. I'm not going to have you sit here for well over an hour as we work through this whole image. We're actually going to break it into 2 parts. So in part 2, we're going to pen tool out this entire bridge. So I'm going to demonstrate how the pen tool works. In case you don't already know how it works, for the time being, just kind of follow along. We're just going to be making essentially one almost straight line here, so very simple to do. Basically, I'm going to start off somewhere around here, just drag our anchor points out, and then just create another line somewhere up at the top here. And again, just kind of create a very small curve for our shooting star, so nothing too big. And actually, I think it's a little bit too long, so I'm going to hit the Command or Control key, and I'm just going to drag this point in a little bit just to shorten our shooting star. So now that we have that, we've got our layer selected, we need to go into our brush tool. And from here, we need to take our flow rate up to 100%. we need to make our brush very hard, so we'll go to around 90%. Our size is going to be very small, so probably around 6 pixels. And you can just kind of test that along by brushing a little bit here, and that's about the width that we want our shooting star to be. So now going back into our pen tool, we're going to right click and we're going to click stroke path. Make sure that simulate pressure is on and the tool is brush. Click OK, and that's going to create our sort of pseudo shooting star there. So there it is there. And what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of glow to it just to make it a little bit less sharp. So I'm going to double click on that layer. I'm going to go into outer glow, and for the settings on outer glow, you want to keep it to around, I would say, 30% with a size of around 15 pixels or so. And the color is going to be, kind of like a white or a yellow bright color, and you're going to blend it with screen blend mode. So now if we zoom into that, then we see, if we toggle this effect on and off, it just adds the faintest amount of glow into there. You probably won't even be able to see it on yours, but it is there, and it does make a difference on my screen. So now, last thing we have left to do is to reintroduce our moon back into our image. So let's go ahead and enable this layer over here. We're going to use our elliptical marquee tool, and we're going to click right in the middle of the moon. Now holding down the Option or Alt and the Shift key, we're going to kind of go out until we almost get to the edge of this glowing portion here, and just kind of adjust our selection using the arrows left and right, up and down, until it's more or less centered within our glow. And then we're going to hit Q to bring up our quick mask mode. And we're going to go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and from here we're going to apply, I would say, around 100 pixels of blur. Hit Q again to recreate a selection. Now with our layer selected, we're going to hit Command or Control J. That is going to isolate that selection out of that layer, so we can just disable this layer now. And we're going to drag it into place where we actually want to see it. So I think a good spot for it is probably going to be somewhere in around there. And then the last thing I want to do with that is to blend it with a different blend mode. So I'm actually going to use Linear Dodge Add, and that's just going to let the background kind of shine through. And it's not going to create any sort of color distortions. It's just going to really take the light portions of that layer and bring them through. Let's just move that into our sky group, and let's just see how far we come. So basically, if we toggle this on and off, we see that this is what we've done with the sky. So we've taken it from a very bland and not terribly exciting sky with this really dominant moon that draws the eye, and we've created something that is much cleaner, a lot more interesting, and has a little bit more color to it. So that's basically where we're going to stop in this part of the tutorial. Now in part 2, we're going to go ahead and resume with obviously creating a reflection of this sky down in the bottom portion here. We're going to do some dodging and burning. We're going to fix the colors within the land here, and basically do everything we need to do to get it to this final polished product that you see in this image. So be sure you don't miss that, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to the YouTube channel below, and also follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/vibrantshot, and we'll see you for part 2.